start letting people in.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We'll wait one more minute so that we're actually at the top of the hour. Still have people filing in from the waiting room. I'd love to know where everyone's joining from. I'm in New York, which is a little chillier than we're used to this time of year, but I suppose that's a good sign in a changing climate. Oh, we got some Canadians in the house. I'm from Ottawa, so you might get an A or an about in here every now and then. All right, Las Vegas. Amazing. This is great. Love the Canadian content. All right. So in the interest of time, I'm gonna get going here. Let me just introduce myself. So my name is Cynthia Thomson, and I'm the head of learning partnerships at Terra.do. I'll talk a little bit more about Terra in later in the presentation. And I'm going to talk about climate career pathfinding today. And I think it might be of interest for me to talk to you a little bit about my background, because I've been in the climate field for a while and recently sort of went on my own career pathfinding adventure. So I've been in the climate space for about 15 years. The majority of that time was spent at Columbia University running graduate programs, interdisciplinary graduate programs in climate and its impact on society. I helped them launch their climate school a couple of years ago, and then sort of had this realization myself that while higher education plays an important role in educating people on climate and getting them to work in the climate space, it moves at a somewhat glacial pace, pun not intended. And I thought there had to be a better way to get more people working on climate faster. And I had this sort of understanding that there were lots of mid-career professionals who were looking to pivot, and how could we have them pivot faster than going to grad school? And through a series of events, I found myself at Terra, and that's exactly what we aim to do at Terra, is to upskill people into climate, or upskill people who are already in climate into sort of different roles. So let me just share my screen and I'll get going. So that's the context for my background. So when I left higher education, I sort of did this career pathfinding of like what I want to do next, and landed at Terra. So today we're going to unpack some key concepts, understand the climate job landscape, and find your professional place in climate, or at least guide you on finding that. I won't go over the crisis too much, because I suspect you are all here because you understand the urgency of it. But what is a climate presentation without a few time series? So here we go. So what you have on your screen is CO2 emissions since 1850. So on the x-axis, we have years. On the y-axis, we have million metric tons of CO2. We know that CO2 is a greenhouse gas that warms the atmosphere. So as we emit it, it traps in more and more heat. And we also know that it essentially does not ever leave the atmosphere. The lifetime of it is so long that we essentially know it sort of just stays in the atmosphere, and that's why it's cumulative. So you can see since the Industrial Revolution, we've been putting more and more CO2 into the atmosphere, and then we just keep doing it like nothing's wrong. And what does that mean? That means our temperatures are going up as well. So what you have in front of you is another time series. So on the x-axis, you have the years, and on the y-axis, you have the temperatures. And just for those who are new in the space, 0 here means that's the mean. So that's the 20th century average temperature, which is 13.9 degrees C. I'm going to talk in degrees C because of my Canadian background. And all these blue lines are years that have been below average. And all the red lines are years that have been above average. And again, the average is the 20th century temperature average. And you can see that since basically the end of the 1970s, we've had nothing but warmer years. So we have not seen a year that's quote unquote average since the 1980s. Last year was a particularly alarming year. The temperature anomaly was almost 1.2 degrees C higher than the 20th century average. So just looking at this sort of like from not even understanding everything on the graph, you can see CO2 goes up, temperature goes up. So that's a problem, right? So how do we solve it? We have to stop emitting CO2. If we want to get to 1.5 degrees C, and it's a conversation I don't want to have today, whether this is the right target or not, but it is a target that has been sort of thrown out there. We need to get to 0 emissions by 2050, or 0 emissions by 2065 to stay below the 2.0 0 degrees C of warming. So this is additional warming. And for either of those, we really need to get to at least a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. We're in 2024. Sometimes I forget that, the pandemic sort of erased all timelines, but that's only 6 years away. And what you have on your screen in front of you is yet another time series. And we see this is CO2 going into the atmosphere. And these slopes are how quickly we need to stop emitting. So if we had stopped emitting back in 2000, we could have done this sort of like slow progression and like slowly, decarbonized our way of life. But we didn't do that, and we're not doing that. And the more we keep emitting, the steeper that slope is, the faster we're going to have to decarbonize. And that's why we need people working in climate. The next, 2020 to 2030, which is actually now just 6 more years, is really pivotal to getting us on track. So what is a climate job? We're going to unpack some key concepts here. So we have green skills, we have green jobs, and we have a green economy. And you can think of these as like from smaller to bigger. So if we have green skills, we're talking about technical skills or knowledge that is required to tackle the environmental challenge in front of us, right? So it's skills that you have that you can bring to your job. So if you bring that to your job and you're working a green job, you're a specialist in a role that focuses on specific domains or initiatives dedicated to improving environmental outcomes. So you have a series of green skills, and then you work in a green job. And then the ultimate goal is to have a green economy. And we're not there yet. This is the green economy, the way that we're defining it here is like a fundamental change in the economy. Think about it on the scale as the Industrial Revolution. So an economy that is unrecognizable compared to what we have today. And demand for green jobs is accelerating because of all of the information I've showed you up until now. We just need more and more people working in the green sector. And you can see that this is from the LinkedIn Green Skills Report from 2023. I'll be referencing that a lot today, but you can see that the demand for green jobs far exceeds the demand for not green, or hiring for green jobs rather, far exceeds the demand for hiring for not green jobs. And these were really the key findings of the 2023 report, which is that the share of jobs requiring green skills grew twice as quickly as the supply. The share of green talent in the workforce rose by a median of 12.3%, while the share of job postings requiring at least one green skill grew twice as quickly. So again, the supply is not meeting the demand. And another fact I wanted to pull out here is that the median LinkedIn hiring rate for workers with at least one green skill is 29% higher than the average workforce. So we can see that demand for green skills and green jobs and hiring in those positions is really increasing. So what does the climate landscape look like? So you could call these sectors or solutions. I like to call them solutions, but this is from the Drawdown Framework for Climate Solutions. And this graph, Drawdown does really pretty graphics, but they do require a little bit of explaining, is the various sectors where there's opportunities to decarbonize and how big those opportunities are. So the larger the circle, the bigger the opportunity. So you can see that we need people working on this issue across sectors. There's literally no sector that is not going to be touched by the green economy. And if we want to get a little more granular and look at the types of jobs, this is a little bit of a laundry list of where there is demand for green skills. And I think sometimes when we think of green skills, we can think of like, people installing solar panels or windmills, and that's certainly there, but we also need people in education, in research, in environmental auditing and policy. So it's not just this sort of focused, like, out there installing infrastructure. We also need people across the economy working on climate. And at Terra, we're building a global upskilling platform to train talent for the green economy. So we are training professionals with the skills to enter this economy or to pivot within it. And our mission is to get 100 million people working in climate by 2030, because that is the type of movement we need to see to tackle this problem. Our thesis is that 99% of people working in climate in 2030 don't currently work in climate. And this graph is a pretty good representation of that. So let me walk you through this. This side, you have not green jobs, greening potential jobs, greening jobs, and green jobs. So just to sort of briefly explain this, not green are jobs that have nothing to do with sort of green skills. Greening potential are jobs where maybe one or two skills is needed, green skills is needed. Greening are jobs that are becoming increasingly green, and then we have green jobs, right? And you can see that for every 10,000 people who leave a not green job, only one of them is transitioning to green jobs. So there's just like a huge bottleneck between this group and this group going into green jobs. So digging deeper into our thesis, half the world's GDP is being completely disrupted or transformed by climate. And to adapt 100 million people across these sectors will need to learn climate skills, build new professional networks, and find new kinds of work within 10 years. And as I said, the current funnel is broken, slow to adapt, and there's a lot of gaps. And really, this talent is becoming the bottleneck to deploy climate solutions. A lot of climate solutions are out there. It's how quickly and we can deploy them and having the right skilled workers to deploy them. This is another graph taken from the LinkedIn Green Skills Report just to show the gap between supply and demand over the next couple of years. So there is a climate job for everyone, and climate is horizontal in every industry. And what we mean by that is climate is going to start to infiltrate all these jobs, right? Like there's a saying out there that everyone's job will be a climate job if you give it long enough. I just want to go back to just reminding you the sectors that Drawdown identified as solution sectors, just to sort of, set you up for what's coming next. These are the common misconceptions about working green jobs. And this comes from Barrier to Working on Climate from Climate People, which is a partner organization at Career Week this week. There's these assumptions you'd have to take a pay cut, that there's no career trajectory, there's a fear of greenwashing. There's a lot of reasons and fears of going into working in climate, but these are largely misconceptions. One of the biggest is I'm not a scientist. I think people assume that being a climate scientist is what, going to the Arctic or the Antarctic and taking these samples or doing computer modeling, when in fact, a lot of work in climate looks more or less like this. Like I said, we really need every skill in the green economy and in climate. We're really just going to need every sector to become climate focused. And so no matter your skills, technical or not, we're going to need people who understand communications. We're going to need people who know how to project manage. We're going to need business developers. We really need everyone at the table. There's also this misconception about not having any climate experience. And one of the like very exciting parts about being in climate right now is there aren't a lot of people who have a ton of experience in this. It's a pretty small pool. And so transferable skills have never been easier to these transferable skills are so valuable and critical, and there's never been an easier time to sort of pitch those to make that transition to the climate space. And we'll talk about how to do that in a few slides. But I just want to really emphasize here that you do not need previous work experience in climate to get a job. If you're like, some of this is just standard job search information, but if in doubt, apply, really be explicit about why you're interested in the job and how your skills apply to the job. And the trick is really that communication. So how do you communicate that? And we'll talk about some tricks and things you can do to get there. And this is maybe the last sort of question that people have. I hope we're kind of past this roadblock now, but can I really make a difference? And one of the things I used to see, particularly with grad students, is it's like they were looking for like the silver bullet solution and they didn't feel like they were a part of it. And unfortunately, the solution is all of us working together and all of us doing our small little part. So from day to day, it can feel like you're not making a big impact, but I can assure you that all of us working together is the only way we're going to solve this. I have a pretty strong conviction that community is the best way to solve the climate crisis, and that community can take different shapes or form, but certainly professional community is a big part of that. And like we're really at the forefront here of a lot of these sectors decarbonizing, and it's a really exciting time and a fun time to be in the space. And like I said, I assure you that your skills are needed and can make a difference in the space. Okay, so I talked about giving you some tricks and figure out how you can find your space. Again, bringing this back, remembering the sectors. So I want you, as I'm going through these next slides, to think about what sector interests you, what sector do you have expertise, where do you think you might want to have an impact? Again, and then you can maybe match them with the skills you have. Are you a researcher? Are you an accountant who has auditing skills? Think about that. And here are some four core questions you want to ask if you're looking for a climate job. And again, this is all, some of this is pretty standard, like when I'm looking for a job, it's just you really have to put that climate lens on. So what climate issue do you most want to work on? And that's why I provided the last two slides. If you're new to the climate space, you'll see that a lot of them fall into two buckets, which is mitigation. And so that's sort of like, how do we stop more climate change from happening? How do we stop emitting? And then adaptation, which is to address the change that's already happened. There isn't one that's more important than the other. I get this question all of the time. We're not going to get by without doing both. Obviously, we want to mitigate as fast as possible, but the change in the system is already baked in. And so there's no way to get around also having to adapt. You'll want to think of the skills you want to use. Are you from sales and marketing? Do you want to stay in sales and marketing? Project management, operations, finance. So what are the skills you already have? Do you want to use those skills to work in climate, or do you want to cultivate, different skills to work in climate? And understanding that that is a journey, right? Like you might not land your perfect climate job on the first try. You might sort of have to build a career in it to get to a job that is 100% climate focused. Do you have a preferred sector? And I won't put up the drawdown graphic one more time, but just thinking about the sectors where you can have an impact. And I think there are like, quote unquote, some sexy like industries. Like I think carbon removal is one that really excites people, but there's also like a lot of quote unquote boring industries that still need to decarbonize. And I think like I have an affinity for people who kind of want to work in those spaces because I think there's a lot of room for impact and a lot of room to move into those spaces. And then lastly, of course, do you have a region or city where you'd like to focus your work? I want to introduce this climate Zen, which is based on Ikigai, which is from Japanese culture, and also we'll source Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson, who did a TED Talk on this. But this is how to find your place in climate. I think one of the things that's interesting about climate is that I know for me at least, it bleeds into my I can't tell where like I crossed the line from professional to personal interest. And so I think trying to figure that out can be difficult, but you can also capitalize on that. So this is sort of an exercise to figure out where your space and climate might be. So you can start sort of anywhere on this diagram, but I'll maybe start at what are you good at? So what skills, resources, and networks do you have? And how, and I guess do you enjoy, putting those skills into action? And then what brings you joy? Think about things that bring you joy, whether it's, I don't know, being in the outdoors, or you really like, I don't know, coding and coming up with things, creating things out of code. And then what work needs to be done. So, if you sort of can find the happy medium between all of that, you really end up in your sort of climate action, bullseye right here.
No, yeah, that's all good, but
sorry. And so if you were to take, I can give you my example. So what am I good at? I tend to be like a project manager. I can really, take ideas and implement them. What brings me joy? For me, honestly, I like bringing in people into the climate conversation and having them understand the urgency and also the opportunity. And then what work needs to be done, certainly educating people, right? So that's how I found my spot. And this is like a really valuable exercise. And a colleague of mine also mentioned like doing this every time they're sort of looking for a new opportunity, whether you're coming into climate or you're already in climate. So how do you choose the right climate job? This is like a great graphic from work on climate. And like I have experienced every one of these emotions. I think job searching for anyone is difficult, and it can be, it can just be a really hard and difficult and lonely process. But working in climate can be even more, I guess, difficult in a lot of ways. And I think this goes back again to sort of like the existential scope of climate change and how the problem is just so big and you can get really bogged down by it. So you're anxious, you're angry, you're overwhelmed, then you get hopeful, and then you're like, oh no, everything is not good again. And it's just this like cycle. I even view this, honestly, I've done this my whole career in climate. I like go through these cycles of like, we're going to get there, things are going to be great. And then then I get sort of like down and have to take a step back. And this is maybe advice for further down the line, but I think for those who are new to climate and just getting into climate, understanding that cycle is really important, that you will go through these phases of feeling hopeless, and just making sure you're kind to yourself and take the time you need. I often say the only thing worse than someone not coming into climate at all is someone coming in, burning out, and leaving. So that's my like extra sort of advice for today. But back to this graphic, just understanding that you're not alone in this process, that it can be frustrating, and particularly if you're looking to make a transition, that can be an even more frustrating task. So some advice for job seeking. If you're new to the climate space, I suggest sort of getting a glimpse of the landscape. Obviously, Terra.Do's Learning for Action program is a great place to start, but there are other programs out there as well. Like I said, climate is all encompassing. And I think having taught actually in the LFA program, and I realize I'm saying this as a Terra employee, but when I came in just as an instructor, it's like a life-changing program over 3 months that really gives you the landscape of climate, and it identifies the problem, the solutions, and and helps you figure out what solution is most intriguing to you and where you might want to start working. So I can't recommend that enough. Also join climate communities and grow your network. I'll have a slide about how to do that, but the climate space is so friendly. Like, I've never met anyone in the climate space who hasn't wanted to talk to me about their journey, the work they do, how you can get involved. So as an introvert, I understand how hard it can be to sort of reach out to people to talk to them about their jobs and do informational interviews, but I highly, highly recommend it. There's a program called Open Door Climate that makes that super easy, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. You want to learn how your skills are transferable, and I'll have a thought exercise in a couple of slides to help you do this. I think this is probably the biggest key to unlock as you're on this journey is learning how your skills are transferable and learning how to pitch that in a job interview. You'll want to get clear on your goals and your narrative. I think that is undervalued or underappreciated a lot, I guess. And when I say clear on your goals and narrative professionally and also within climate professionally, right? So why is this a space you want to be a part of? The always popular, if in doubt, always apply. And you do want to demonstrate your passion. I've heard from enough hiring professionals to know that they're like, if we have 2 candidates and one doesn't have like all the skills we need, but they have a passion and a willingness to learn, then they are often the ones who are selected. So you really want that to come across in a job interview or in your cover letter. And then I think this is the most important, is it's a multi-step journey. So, it might take a few jobs with some climate, sprinkled in before you get to a job that is fully focused on climate. And I think that's important to remember. So I mentioned earlier, there's Open Door Climate. There's a website if you Google Open Door Climate, but Daniel Hill, who started it, will be hosting an event on Friday. And this is Daniel has created such a great network of climate practitioners who just like have open office hours that you can schedule a time with them to talk. So like, I cannot emphasize enough how nice it is to have that barrier removed, to just be able to like sign up and talk to someone. I would come in knowing, what you want to talk about. Daniel will go over that on Friday. But like I said, most people want to talk about the work they do and are happy to talk to anyone who's interested. And so I highly encourage you to do that. Now, coming back to sort of your transferable skills. So this credit to this goes to Jonathan Stark in the XY positioning statement. But this is a really good way for you to start to think about your transferable skills and how they might fit into a job description that you see online. I wouldn't necessarily like include these exact sentences and say a cover letter, but I think doing this exercise to help you understand how you might fit into a role that you see is really, really helpful. So it's a little bit Mad Lib style, but you'll want to identify 3 skills. Who do you serve? What difference do you make for that company, or can you make? What are you passionate about? And why do you want to work on climate? And this says get specific, and I would agree here. I mean, you can argue that everyone, or hopefully most everyone, thinks that climate is important to work on, but like, what specifically brought you to climate? Why is this a topic you want to work on? And I think like a powerful, like having your climate origin story can be really powerful. I know I have mine, and I use that a lot when I'm talking to people. These are two examples of the positioning statements filled out. So we have Marcy. My name is Marcy, and I do productization, partnership, business development, community relations, and sales for scalable climate companies and help them grow communities, connections, and their climate base. I'm interested in opportunities at the intersection of renewable energy, creative reuse, and workforce development. I want to work on climate because it's the most urgent issue of our time, and we have so many opportunities to improve upon our existing systems. That last sentence, I would even get more specific. I think that's a little too broad. If we look at Diego, his last sentences, I'm interested in opportunities at the intersection of climate justice and climate change, specifically in the fields of circular economy and sustainable apparel. So the more specific you can get, the better. But I, like I said, I think these are good thought experiments for like pulling out how your skills can transfer to the climate space. And I thought I would pull out, this is actually credit goes to Catherine Markova, one of our instructors at Terra. She pulled this job interview yesterday. And I thought it was interesting that, so this is for Foot Locker. They're looking for an ESG controller. So environmental, sustainable environment, social governance. Sorry, got that acronym wrong. ESG is also a somewhat new field. And for this job, they're looking for someone who's both an expert in US GAAP and SEC reporting and an ESG expert. I'm sure there are a couple unicorns out there who have all of this experience, but you could see how maybe they would consider an accountant or someone who's used to sort of reporting and regulations not in the environmental space and train them in the environmental space. Like finding a candidate who fit all of these qualifications would be extremely rare. And so I bring this up to say, like, if you were to look at this and you're like, oh, but I don't have any ESG specific background, familiarize yourself with ESG, take a course, do a deep dive on YouTube and understand how maybe your accounting background can actually serve you in an ESG role and apply with that lens in mind. So this is what a lot of climate jobs look like. They're going to want very specific experience, a lot of years of experience. And as I mentioned earlier, this climate field is quite new. And so don't let those deter you from applying. I'm just about done here, I promise. This is a list of resources to help support your climate journey. So there's places to learn. There's places to meet other climate-focused individuals. Terra itself has an active community, but Work on Climate is another great place to go to look for other people in the space. And then these are resources where you can find jobs. So that's it. I'm sorry I cruised through that pretty quickly. This is my email if anyone wants to reach out. I would be happy to talk to anyone. But yeah, I'm happy to take any questions. I'll stop sharing. Okay, let me go to the Q&A. Someone asks, what about if I excel mostly at soft skills? I cannot tell you enough how many soft skills are needed in the climate space. I think soft skills in general, well, first of all, I should start by saying I don't love the term soft skills because I feel like it implies there's some like superior skill than that. I actually think soft skills is a huge skill in the climate space, particularly as we're entering phases where we need to sort of compel whether it's individuals or organizations to work on climate. I think having those interpersonal skills, those quote unquote soft skills is really, really important. I would say that in my current role, I use 90% soft skills versus quote unquote hard skills. How do you see AI impacting climate careers? I am not an AI expert, don't fully understand it enough to answer this. But I can tell you that AI is incredibly carbon intensive. And so not to get too sort of meta on answering this question, but in AI itself, there is a lot of room to make it, I think there's a lot of room to make it more environmentally friendly and to really understand the implications of, turning our economy largely towards, or our society, I guess, largely towards AI and how detrimental that can be from a climate impact. There was some recent research that was released on that. Well, I love my Terra Fellowship. It's not helping me land a job. It gave me a stellar up-to-date climate information. What's the best way to pitch in lieu of a grad degree? I think that a lot of these education programs are crucial in getting you to be fluent in climate and understand what you're talking about. And, I do have a couple of degrees actually in climate and sustainability, and I've still struggled to land jobs. So I would hesitate to make the connection that like I'm not getting a job because they didn't appreciate my fellowship. I think the story you weave has to be well thought out and strong. And honestly, like all job searching, some of it just comes down to luck, right? Like we've all been in the job search where things just haven't worked out. And I wish I could give you like secrets to like landing a job, period. Unfortunately, it comes down to just, who's in the room and who's the best fit for the job. Sometimes not even who's the best fit for the job. There is a bit of luck there, right? This is a great question. How do I identify and avoid jobs that engage in greenwashing? And I think you have to develop a really critical lens here. And you have to, I'm going to say that like it's impossible to be a perfect climate person, right? We can't all live like carbon neutral lives. So the society is not built that way, right? I also think it's impossible to find a perfect climate job because a sort of extractive economy is necessarily going to have some drawbacks for the climate, right? So we're at such an early stage in this sort of climate careers point in life that you'll have to find what drawbacks you're comfortable with in any given job, and if you can think you can push that industry, that company, that your manager, whatever the scale of the changes, if you can push them to be better. This is going to be it needs to be a fast like transition. We're not great at that societally unless we're like confronted with some huge like impact. Like the problem with climate change is it like happens over time, right? So it's like the frog in the boiling water. All of that to say, this is going to involve a lot of us pushing. And if we all push a little, that's like a big push. And so coming back to your question, I think you want to research your company really well, see what they're doing well, see what they can be better on, and be okay with the things they're not perfect on, and understand if you can push them. And that's going to be different for everyone. And I think that that's like the best way to take that into consideration. A lot of climate career information seems to be about pivoting careers for people who already have a job. Is there any specific advice for recent grads with limited work background trying to find work? I do see a lot of like paid fellowships and internships out there in the sustainability field over the summer. It's worth taking a dive right now if you're particularly if you're in the US. I think that on-the-job training is really impactful and really helpful. So that would be my first suggestion. Also, if you are currently in school or are a recent grad, I would also utilize your school's career development office, because they often will have connections to people in the industry. Could you give some advice to those of us who are PhD scientists looking to join the climate tech space? This is a great question. I think that my personal opinion is that climate tech needs so many more people who understand the science and understand the known unknowns, right? I think particularly in climate tech, there can be the risk of trying to do something good and unintentionally making things worse or whatever. And so I think that there's a big need for these. I see a lot of it. It depends what your sort of background is. I see a ton of it right now in the carbon removal space, which I think makes a lot of sense. Trying to develop the technologies and also trying to sort of prove that the technologies work. I would also, there's a lot of like professionals out there who work with PhD students who are trying to sort of make that move from academia to private industry. And I'll put on my like former higher education hat for a minute and say that that is a move a lot of people are trying to make, particularly in the climate space, seeing that like a lot of this movement is happening in private industry. Some of the climate scientists I used to work with said like the last thing we need is another climate scientist. We all know that the climate is changing. We need people who are out there working and deploying the solutions. So I don't have any super specific advice except that to like really think about the space you want to work in and and how you want to pitch yourself to those tech companies. Let me see what else. I don't unfortunately have the research to sort of answer the questions of what are some of the primary reasons people are not getting hired, especially if they have transferable skills. But there are sort of more of those career specific or like job searching specific events happening later this week. So it's worth looking at the climate career page. How do you recommend going about asking for an informational interview? Because you want to be polite. That's really helpful. I mean, polite is great. Like going back to soft skills, I think you just reach out to someone, you say, hey, I'm new to the climate space, or I'm in the climate space, but I'm interested in X, Y, whatever you do. Would love to have a chance to talk to you about your work and what you do. Would you be willing to have a chat? It's that easy. I've never said no to anyone who's reached out and asked me to meet. And I suspect others feel the same way, assuming they have the bandwidth to do it. Like I said, I'm like very, very proud to be in the climate space because it is such a warm and welcoming space. And we all just want as many people as possible working in it. Where can you find trends per country regarding demand for green jobs? The LinkedIn report actually does it geographically. So they will break that down if you just do a Google search of the LinkedIn green skills for 2023. How can people in their early career pivot to a role in climate? I think that I think particularly if you're early in your career and have a lot of energy and willingness to learn, I think if you can make that come across in both your cover letter and your job interview, that's a big part of it. Like I said, there's so much work to be done here and so much new work to be done that the eagerness and the willingness to learn, I think, is really important. Sorry, just trying there are so many sectors and types of jobs, but a lot of what I'm seeing on jobs boards is sustainability manager, analyst, coordinator. Any comment on these more general titles? For example, my interest is in the circular economy, but I don't see any roles with that title in it. Yeah, I mean, I think this is an interesting part about climate and something I used to tell my graduate students at Columbia is it's not like being an engineer or a teacher, like things that have very distinct career paths. A lot of climate is actually pathfinding and understanding where you can have an impact. So I think that, if you're interested in the circular economy, you'll have to find jobs where it touches on that, right? There's likely not going to be a circular economy specialist position at a company, not right now anyways. So you have to figure out where within the company you can have that influence. And this goes back to like gently nudging, right? Like we also have a couple courses at Terra coming out on this, like how you as an employee, either at your current company or at a company you join, can become an advocate within that company to help push for sustainability, broadly in initiatives. And so I think don't underestimate that power too. Like if you haven't been able to land like quote unquote the perfect climate job, don't underestimate your ability to push for change in the organization you're already in. Climate Voice is a great nonprofit that talks a lot about that if you want to get more information on that, because I think that that's really important. We're all the best advocates for the companies we work for. Sorry, there's a lot of questions to there was a question about my email. It is here. I'll type it in the chat. It's cynthia@terra.do. All right. I have a lot of questions about climate change analysts. I'm not from an analyst background, so unfortunately, I can't tell you the exact skills that people are looking for. I do know that I do see so. I think what's interesting is a lot of, particularly with these regulations coming out around having to report your emissions, like California has them, Europe's coming out with them. I do see a lot of room for growth in these sort of accounting spaces, whether it's greenhouse gas accounting or, whether it's like ESG reporting. ESG is a term that like every now and then I feel like it's kind of thrown under the bus, but ESG an idea is not going anywhere, right? We all want our companies to be more accountable. So I do see a lot of room for growth in those spaces. If you have either like an analytics background or a data background or an accounting background, understanding how to report, understanding the difference between scope 1, scope 2, and specifically scope 3. So that's a space that I'm definitely seeing a lot of growth in, but I'm sure there's another session this week that talks more about sort of the trends in the hiring marketplace. I know more about education trends than hiring trends. Let's see what else. I find it difficult to translate my skills in project management. So I feel like I can talk about this one. So someone is saying they're finding it difficult to translate their skills in project and program management, given that this type of role tends to require a lot more domain knowledge. So I can speak to this because that's sort of, what I consider myself as a project manager. I think you can do a lot with self-education. And I'm not just saying this with my Terra hat on, but I think a lot of because you said you need the domain knowledge. I think a lot of it is about being fluent in an interview, right? Like convincing them in an interview that you know what you're talking about. I know, for instance, the LFA program that Terra offers, Learning for Action program, like I still use that if I'm going to talk to course creators who work in sectors I'm not super familiar with. I just go into that course content. I'm like, all right, what do I need to know about regenerative ag? And I study that before I have a conversation with them, right? And when I was job searching, I would do that too. So you can learn a lot of it on the job, but you need to convey that you know enough about it when you're interviewing. So I same thing with a carbon removal company. I was like, didn't know much about carbon removal, ended up getting an interview for a program manager position for a carbon removal company. So I just did like a 1-day deep dive on it so I could be fluent in the job interview. And, I think I'm fairly confident in saying most places will prioritize, do you have the ability to do the role versus the domain content knowledge? Because I think that can be learned a little bit on the job. That would be my personal suggestion. How can I demonstrate my passion for environmental issues and commitment to sustainability during a job interview? I think this is a great question. And I think this is where specificity helps, because if you just come into the room and say, I care about the environment, like, okay, so does everyone else applying for this job. Why do you care? How does this job allow you to, care more deeply or affect the change that you want to affect? And why are you the right person for this role? And like I said, getting as specific as possible about the job itself and the role you think you can play in making a climate impact in that role. So getting more specific than just, I care about climate and I work on climate, like get really specific to that organization and to that role. Advice on finding and connecting with recruiters who focus on the climate space. I know for sure there is a session this week on that. I'm sorry, I don't have all the sessions listed here, but take a look at Climate Career Week and someone with a little bit more experience can help you. Let's see. Sharing your climate origin story in a professional setting. Do you recommend not mentioning traumatic experiences like forest fires? I don't actually. I think as long as you spin it in a way that leads to as long as it's relevant to why you're in the room. And there's a bunch of research out there that says most people start to care about climate change when they've been affected by it. So I think most people's origin story is going to have some sort of climate affected me in X way, and that's how I got interested in climate. Then I trained myself and now I'm here. I think that that's actually a really compelling story to be like, something happened to you personally. You cared so much about it that you got all of this training and upskilling, and now you're applying for a job here. So I think as long as you spin the narrative the right way, so much of this is about storytelling, then I think it's totally fine to bring that up in a job interview. Just trying to find some other ones. Just trying to find some questions I haven't answered yet. What do you recommend for people who have always worked in generalist roles? I think that, all companies need people in generalist roles. So this is something else to consider when you're applying for a climate job. It might be that the role you're doing day to day doesn't feel climate-y, but you're working for a company that is, tackling the problem. So when I can use an example of when I worked at Columbia, right? I was like, well, every day I'm sort of just answering emails and sometimes I felt more like a therapist than even an administrator. But on the whole, I could see that, well, 40 students each year were graduating from this program, and we're going to go into the workforce and make a difference. So I think it's also important to understand that like I said earlier, not every day are you going to feel like you're having a direct impact on climate, but if you're working for a company who is, then you're having that impact. So also being able to like tie everything together, I think is really important. How can we use the Terra job board for jobs? It's pretty easy. You just can do a job search on the Terra job board. Are climate jobs increasing globally? Are they concentrated in certain countries for now? I think on the whole, they're growing. There are some concentrations in different parts of the world. I know in the US right now, there's a lot of trepidation around the election next year. So I think there's like been a little bit of a slowdown. Everyone's kind of in this holding pattern to see what the next administration is going to be, unfortunately. But Europe is really leading the way here. And any sort of multinational companies are going to have to follow that if they want to sort of operate in all of these jurisdictions. So, there might be trends in some countries over others, but on the whole, globally, I think they're growing across the board. Like I said, the LinkedIn report has a pretty good data around that. All right. I think that's most of the questions. But I thank you again for joining today. And like I said, I shared my email if there's anything you need help with. And yeah, thanks again for being here.